And welcome back, everyone. Once again, I'm Mark Johnston, your host here for the VID5 conference, sponsored by our friends at Laurentian Bank Securities. And it is the top of the hour. We welcome a new company and a new guest, David Clark, who is the president and CEO of Burin Gold Corporation out of Vancouver. David, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Mark. I'm very happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, as always, I'll keep my intro nice and clean and efficient, step to the side for your presentation. I do welcome all of our guests tuning in from around the world to please put your questions in the Q&A column. We'll get to those after David's presentation and get to as many as we possibly can. David, over to you, and good journey.
Thank you very much, Mark. All right, well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for being here. As Mark mentioned, my name is David Clark. I'm the CEO of Burin Gold Corp. I'm quite pleased to be here today, this afternoon, and particularly so to be here as a presenter alongside all the producing companies. This is a stroke of fate, I think, and a good omen for Burin Gold, which is a grassroots explorer with ambition. So today's talk is going to be to introduce the company and our exploration property in eastern Newfoundland. So we're going to highlight the work we've done to de-risk the project as a private company since 2018. We're going to talk about the IPO we just completed just a few weeks ago and what we intend to do in 2022. So we're going to go through geology, results, diamond drilling, and I'm going to present as well a comparison of the discovery history of our Hickey's Pond project with that of the Hope Brook mine in southwest Newfoundland, which is a near 2 million ounce deposit that's maybe our closest analog, and it gives you an idea of the type of potential that we're looking at Hickey's Pond. So without further ado, let's start with everyone's favorite slide, cautionary language, which you can read at your leisure, and straight on to the meat of the presentation. I start with a summary slide here. It's a really quick snapshot of the company. We incorporated this company in 2018 specifically to explore for gold in Newfoundland. We've raised just under 4 million privately between 2018 and 2020 to advance and de-risk our project. We completed a listing on the TSX Venture Exchange 2 weeks ago on November 22nd after closing a $6.9 million financing, and we're trading under the symbol BURG, B-U-R-G. So that's all happened very recently, so we're very excited to be where we are today with a full treasury and ready to get back to exploration. Our property is a large land position on the Burin Peninsula. That's in eastern Newfoundland, which is one of the best jurisdictions in the world. It's a large property, 159 square kilometers, and it includes 20 kilometers of strike along two historical belts of showings on two trends. Very little historical drilling in this part of Newfoundland specifically, and particularly little exploration drilling on our property. Our own 2020 scout drill program at Hickey's Pond consisted of just over 1,000 meters in 7 holes, and the 6 holes that were completed to depth intercepted significant zones greater than 1 gram. That included a best result of 10.8 meters of 4.4 grams at shallow depth under a surface channel that ran 20 meters of 9 grams. So with the successful close of our financing, we now have a strong treasury. We're ready to go back and start a large-scale drill program at Hickey's Pond and elsewhere on our property. And we expect that 2022 is going to be a year full of news for the company with hopefully some exciting results. Before we talk about the property itself, a little bit about the company. We're very pleased to have both Phil Walford and Sherry Dunsworth sitting on our board. Phil and Sherry bring a wealth of technical and corporate experience to our company. They're both highly respected and well connected in Newfoundland, and most recently they were honored by the PDAC with the Prospector of the Year award, jointly awarded to both of them for their work at Marathon Gold. So during their tenure there, where Phil was the president CEO and Sherry was VPX, they successfully brought Valentine Lake from grassroots to resource stage, and I think many people would credit them with igniting the current excitement in Newfoundland for gold and the land rush that's followed their success. So they're both serious resource-oriented explorers, and they definitely brought their talents and skills to Burin, have been very extremely involved and have provided great mentorship and experience for me to make use of. Rounding out the board, we have Dan James, who's a colleague and friend from Plethora Private Equity, which is the Dutch fund that's incubated Burin Gold, provided a lot of the seed funding and the majority of the investment in the early rounds of financing as a private company. Dan is a co-founder of the company. He's a geologist from the UK, and before his role with Plethora, he was the president of MedGold Resources, which is another TSX-listed company exploring in Europe. Finally, Tom Panulius is a capital markets professional in Toronto, and he brings his banking and market experience to the board. So we have a nice rounded board. and including myself, who's a geologist. I'm the co-founder of the company. I've been in Vancouver, working in Vancouver as an exploration geologist since 2010, and I co-founded Burin Gold in 2018. So I've brought this company from a concept on paper to a listed company with a strong treasury and a good exploration asset. And then rounding out the board, we have a strong management team with a lot of experience, combined experience working for junior resource companies. So capital structure, IPO proceeds very quickly. This is our current post-IPO capital structure, just shown here. We have a relatively tight float here, 38.3 million shares outstanding. That's 44.3 fully diluted. Our cash position as of the date of the IPO is 6.36 million. And that includes just a little bit over 2 million of flow through dollars, and the rest are hard dollars. In our key shareholders, if you look at the pie chart to the right, you'll see that New Gold is a significant early investor, holding just under 10%. They recognize the potential of our property, I think, early on, and they put in a significant investment both on a private round and on the IPO round to bring their share position to just under 10%. Plethora Private Equity, the Dutch fund that incubated us, is still a significant shareholder at 24%, and company insiders collectively control just under 20%. We have about 20 million pre-IPO shares currently escrowed, so the free float on the market today is approximately somewhere around 18 million shares. So that's it for the company structure, project location, and let's just jump into the geology. Here's a map of Newfoundland, and this is showing many of the currently explored gold projects on the island. I've noted let me just turn on my brush size here. There we go. So I've noted the Burin Peninsula here in the southeast of the province, and the project is located by a big red star. We'll talk about this a little later, but I think it's important to note from the beginning that the Burin Peninsula and eastern Newfoundland in general is a different geological terrain from central Newfoundland. So a lot of the names you'll be familiar with exploring currently in central are looking for orogenic gold deposits. These are high-grade narrow vein deposits, different from the kind of thing we're looking for on the Burin. The Burin is a volcanic terrain that contains a lot of epithermal occurrences, a lot of epithermal showings, and the potential on the Burin Peninsula are for bulk tonnage and high grade, low sulfidation, high sulfidation epithermal deposits. And that sets up a key difference between Burin Gold and some of our peer companies in Newfoundland, is we're looking for a bulk tonnage target. We're looking for the high grade feeders for them, but really those types of targets will attract a different type of mining company than the narrow vein high-grade deposits or high-grade showings in the orogenic environment. So if we zoom into the geology of the Burin, this is a simplified geological map. The geology of the Burin is typical of environments in which epithermal deposits form. So the green rocks that I'm showing here are felsic to mafic subaerial volcanic rocks, and the red rocks are their equivalent granites, so the rocks, the magma chambers that form the volcanic rocks. The yellow lines that you can see here along these corridors, these yellow lines represent large crustal structures that appear to focus the hydrothermal fluid flows, and those are the structures along which the hydrothermal occurrences are located on the Burin. So these rocks are Neoproterozoic in age. That means about 580 million years in this case. So they're quite old for epithermal occurrences, and I think this is one of the reasons why the Burin Peninsula has escaped a lot of attention in recent years. These types of systems are present in the Neoproterozoic, but they're not as common because they're often eroded away. So we're just lucky here that the accidents of geology have preserved the systems, and they've started to be explored recently. Before launching Burin Gold, I spent a lot of time in project evaluation, and one of the things we look for in early stage projects, of course, you're looking for the geological potential, but you're also looking for all those other things around a project that are important in a development scenario. There's lots of things that can kill a project, and the sooner you identify those things, the better as an investor. So one of the things I looked at very closely when we first proposed this project was all those things around the infrastructure of a project that will be important later on. You want to see early on if you have that potential. So you can see the property here in dark blue. Some of the other claims in the area are in light gray, and some of the infrastructure I'm showing here. First thing to note, the Trans-Canada Highway in the east of this map. So the Trans-Canada Highway runs from St. John's, which is about a 2-hour drive clear across the country. The Burin Highway tees off from the Trans-Canada, located right about here, and it comes down the spine of the Burin Peninsula all the way. This is a regional highway, a 90-kilometer-an-hour speed limit, excellent access. We're also very lucky. There's a 138 kilovolt power line, which is the main power line that runs. This is this pink line that runs down the spine of the Burin parallel to the highway. This power line provides power to the peninsula, to all the communities on the peninsula, and is located just adjacent to the property. In fact, there's a substation on the property right here that joins up the high tension line with one of the small 8 megawatt hydro station located on the end of this bay. In addition to that, you have tidewater on both sides of the peninsula, Fortune Bay here in the west and Placentia Bay here in the east. In fact, there's a deep water port located right here at Come By Chance. That's a refinery and Deepwater Port is one of, I think it's in the top 5 or 6 ports in Canada in terms of shipping volume. So there's a great facility right there as well. So these are all early indications, early important things to see on a mining property. You see that potential for easy development. And the other thing that's important is we don't see, if I can use a double negative, we don't see the things that you don't want to have. So there are no land claims in this part of Newfoundland. There are no municipal boundaries affecting our claims. There are no municipal watersheds. There are no caribou herds, no registered salmon rivers, none of the things that can really affect permitting or development. In fact, we've received drill permits in under 30 days from the date of application. So that's just an indication of how simple the referral agency process is here and how straightforward the permitting is. So that sets the stage for the geology, which is, of course, the other important aspect of any mineral project, is you need to see the right geology. This is a zoom in now on the geology in and around the property. The mapping scale here is quite coarse. There's not a lot of detail here. This is a reflection of the fact that this part of Newfoundland hasn't been mapped at a fine scale for several decades. So the state of knowledge in general of the geology is a little on the limited side. But we see the same setup here. We see in yellow and green the felsic and mafic volcanic rocks respectively, and in red we see the granites. The pink lines with the black dots represent the trend of the historical showing. So each of these showings, and this is about, if you note the scale down here, we have a scale bar here that shows this is a 6 kilometer scale bar. So really you have approximately 15 kilometers running along this trend, and then about another 6 kilometers running along this trend. So these are historical showings that consist of typical alteration mineralogy and textures that are associated with high-sulphidation epithermal districts. Each of these has frequent alunite, porphyroid, hydrothermal quartz, gold mineralization, all important ingredients in high-sulphidation districts. All of these showings have been known about for quite some time, since the mid-1980s, for the most part. Hickey's Pond was known a little before that. But only Hickey's Pond, in fact, has seen any historical drilling at all, and that was 4 holes in 1983 and 4 holes in 1990. The rest of this property package has never been drilled, and so there's nearly 20 kilometers of strike here with multiple showings to test. I'm also showing here some of the footprints of the geophysical surveys we've undertaken, and we'll be looking at that in the next few slides. But essentially, we have an IP resistivity survey located over the historical Hickey's Pond showing, and then a larger airborne VTEM survey that surrounds this in 2 blocks. And we'll be looking at that shortly. But the reason I wanted to go over the reason we did all this work was some of the early work that we did. And this is results of channel sampling that we completed in late 2018. This was a program that we planned after early reconnaissance visits to the old historical prospect. What we realized is that although this was a well-known prospect in Newfoundland and had been sampled several times in the past, and there was good evidence that was high-grade mineralization on surface here, that had never been followed up with systematic sod channel cuts to just test the overall width and grade of mineralization at surface. So one of the first things that we did was complete 5 channels over the exposure at the historical showing to establish what that width and grade could be. And these are some of the highlights located here. We have 5 meters of 22 grams, 20 meters of 9 grams, and 16 meters of 6 grams at surface. largely hosted in a vuggy quartz host. So a classic high sulphidation epithermal host. Interestingly, we also identified just under a little bit of shallow till, so just a little bit of hand digging with some shovels, some gold copper tenantite breccia. This was part of channel 2 and included 7 meters of 19.7 grams gold and 3.6% copper in this rock here, which is a gold copper tenantite breccia. So we'll discuss the possible significance of these a little later, but overall, these results were highly encouraging, and they showed the potential of the system to have both mineable widths and grades near surface. So we returned to the property to do some geophysics over the known zones and see what the extensions of these look like. So we did 2 surveys. Again, this is the IP resistivity survey in this small inset map, and then the larger VTEM survey around it. What you're seeing here is chargeability, plan map of chargeability in the IP resistivity, and you're seeing airborne inductively induced polarization in the VTEM map. This is a proxy for chargeability, and it can sometimes be quite useful. In our case here, what we see is the chargeability zones on the DCIP map match very nicely with what you see in the VTEM. In other words, the edge of the map anomalies, for example, here, truck on very nicely along in the other data set. And so it is with the main trend where you see a 7-kilometer trend that extends all the way up here where it becomes quite a complex zone with some repetition. And the only bit that's ever been tested is a small amount, about 10% of the overall strike right in the middle. So our 2020 program really focused right here on the middle of these anomalies, and that's what we're going to look at next. We're going to zoom into that area. That's the chargeability anomaly map again, now zoomed in. So you can see we have about 700 meters of strike here that we tested with 7 holes. See, these are some pretty bold step outs, 100 meter to 200 meter step outs on strike to test the potential of this system for large scale mineralization. The highlights from this system are shown, from this program rather, are shown here. And one of the things I think is important to note is we're seeing wide zones of potentially economic mineralization near surface. These are not narrow vein, high grade results that are hard to correlate from hole to hole. What we're seeing here is that we're seeing a sheet-like body of mineralization which appears to be present across the system, which has a larger zone of lower grade mineralization with zones of higher grade mineralization within that. So the zones of lower grade mineralization include results like 21 meters of 0.9 grams in hole 7, which is located here. The mineralization is hosted in hydrothermal quartz, hydrothermal breccias, and quartz alunite schists. So we're going to look at now a section. If I just undo these drawings, we're going to look at a section which is located right here. This is the only area that we have multiple drill holes in, so it's the only place we can show you a cartoon. But this shows a representative cartoon of what we think is going on. This was a modest 1,000-meter program, so we don't have a lot of drill holes put into it. But what you can see is we have the surface channel located here. That was the 20 meters of 9 grams. We have hole 2, which is located underneath it along here and intersected 10.8 meters of 4.4 grams at shallow depth under the high-graded surface. And then we see that we do have continuity to depth, where we have a 6.7 meter intercept of 1.3 grams at depth in hole 5. We also see that there's clearly potential for the system to pinch and swell, which is going to be expected in a shear zone kind of system. But you see a good geometry here to contemplate an open pit, should we be able to demonstrate that we have good continuity of grade across the system. So I'm going to show you now on the next slide a sample of the mineralized core in hole 2. So this is the sample of core that we got right below the surface showing. It may be hard, I'm not sure if you can see this very well, but what we're seeing here is we enter into the drill section right about the 10-meter mark, and we're in the section of quartz alunite schists. This is them in here. They're kind of a banded pinky black rock. The black is specularite, the pinkish mineral is alunite, and this typically is the sort of the distal portion of the mineralized system that surrounds the zones of higher grade. It seems to run between 0.2 and 0.6 or 0.7 grams in general, probably an average of 0.4 or 0.5, and it is a mineralized typical hydrothermal product in high sulphidation environments, and we enter the ore zone right about here. And we have a zone from about that 10-meter mark down to about here of consistent gold grade in that multi-gram range. So if you go down this list of assays, you can see you're really in that sort of 2 to 10 gram range with a couple of higher hits and a couple of lowers, but it is really a consistent grade across the mineralized zone. The mineralized zone here is a hydrothermal quartz breccia, multiple generations of hydrothermal quartz, quite consistent and with high sulfidation systems. And this overall system, once it exits the higher grade portion, returns to that quartz alunite unit for a good number of meters after the high grade hit. Overall, this is a 58-meter section grading 1.12 grams. So, how significant are these results? We presented the results of a relatively short drill program of 1,000 meters of core, where 6 of the 7 holes hit significant widths of gold mineralization. And we want to know, how significant is that? What are the probabilities that this very early project will translate into a major resource? So this is the results of a study that I thought were quite interesting, and I've sort of scraped their data here. This is Kenorland Minerals put this together last year. They did a really interesting study where they looked at Canadian gold discoveries over 2 million ounces. And they looked at, statistically, if you look back at each of these projects, in their first discovery drill hole, before they knew they had something big, what did the first drill hole results look like in that first program? And is there something statistically we can say about early stage programs? So what they came up with was a graph where they show along the y-axis grade thickness of the best hole in the initial discovery program. So grade thickness, for those that are not familiar, is simply the average grade of an interval multiplied by the width of that interval. And it gives you a number, which is in gram meters per ton. Which is a reflection of the overall endowment in gold of that interval. So they plotted, this is the best result of each hole, or the best hole rather, of each of these gold projects. And this is plotted against, on the x-axis, the eventual gold endowment of that project once it was all said and done and explored. And what they recognized in this statistical study is that there was a key metrics for determining, how significant early stage results was this. They discovered that 2 million ounce deposits tended to have an initial drill intercept over 50 gram meters. They determined that initial intercept length tended to be over 5 meters, and they discovered that these results were all the more significant when the initial program meterage was less than 4,000 meters. In other words, when you only put in a small project, a small drill program, and you still get these kinds of results, that's quite significant. So in that context, if you look at Burin Gold's 2020 program, we put in a 1,000-meter program. We had a best intercept of 65 gram meters per ton over 58 meters. We check all of these boxes. We recognized as well that there was high sulfidation, epithermal mineralization, and alteration in every drill hole that was completed. And I think what this really does is it just provides a context that shows that we compare very favorably in the context of other major Canadian gold discoveries to what the early stage may have looked like. So it's not a guarantee of anything, but it is an indication, I think, that we have all those right ingredients. Actually, speaking of right ingredients, this is a cartoon figure that shows the typical architecture of a modern high sulfidation epithermal system. And why I show this is I want to show that we have all of these features across the property. A typical high sulfidation system, in brief, starts with a magma chamber at depth. That magma chamber is off-gassing magmatic vapors. These percolate up along structures, and they eventually hit favorable volcanic lithologies, like this one here, for example, in the cartoon, where they can permeate along porous structures or porous lithologies, and they tend to they're very highly acidic, very hot fluids. They dissolve out the original mineralogy, and they leave behind typically quartz. The ore zones in these systems are in vuggy residual quartz units, and you tend to get the bulk tonnage targets within these vuggy zones. You can also get high-grade mineralization hosted in late structures or in late fluid emplacements along structures. So that's a modern system. The important thing is across our property over the 20 kilometers, we have residual quartz at Hickey's Pond. We have lithology controlled lithocaps obvious in a number of locations, a lot of quartz alunite alteration, a lot of clay alteration, and most recently with that channel program, we showed that we have tenantite copper gold breccia at Hickey's Pond, an indication we may be close to a feeder controlled, structure controlled feeder. So just very, very important to see these ingredients located across the property. I think it underscores the Hickey's Pond project as a district that has a lot of potential. To give you a comparison now to a known deposit, I thought I would just quickly talk about the Hope Brook mine and show you a few slides that showed what did Hope Brook look like in its early days of exploration. This is a tectonostratigraphic map of Newfoundland, and it just shows that Hope Brook, located in southwest Newfoundland, and Hickey's Pond, located in southeast Newfoundland, are part of the same geological terrane, that Avalonian terrane, which is an accreted terrane that got stuck onto ancestral North America. So they're in the same geological terrane. Hope Brook is, of course, a past producer. It was discovered in 1983 and put into production in 1987. A resource there of just somewhere around 2 million ounces, 750,000 ounces were produced, and it's currently being explored by Big Ridge Gold. Hickey's Pond is a direct analog for Hope Brook, completely unexplored, and is hosted in the same rocks. So we're going to look a little bit at the exploration history of these things. Here I'm showing Hickey's Pond on the left, and I'm showing a map from one of the very early assessment reports on Hope Brook on the right. These are drawn to the same scale, so you can actually compare the footprint on the right with the footprint on the left, and they look very similar. So on the left-hand side, you can see what Hickey's Pond looked like before our drilling in 2020. We had some channel results, 8 meters of 11.5 grams, 20 meters of 9 grams. These came from the Hickey's Pond showing in the middle of that little peninsula in the pond. We had an outcrop just jutting out of the pond here with a 0.6 gram sample from a quartz alunite schist. That gave us about a 650 strike of mineralization exposed. No outcrop all along strike. This is all under shallow till, and this is a lot of bog and shallow till going on along strike. Over at Hope Brook in 1983, I've put here in green in these colors the results of their channels. So you can see along here there was a series of channels. You can see that most of these were quite low grade, 10 ppb to 20 ppb, etc., except for these red channels right located approximately here, which were in that over a gram range. And so they had 2 hits in the channel sampling there, 15 meters of 10 grams and 55 meters of 2 grams. So that 15 meters of 10 grams compares very, very favorably with, for example, our 20 meters of 9 grams. That was what prompted them to put in their discovery drill program at Hickey's Pond. So if you fast forward, the discovery holes, again, these are drawn at the same scale. So this is the section we looked at on the left previously. And this is, again, a section taken from an early BP Selco assessment report. In our case, our discovery hole of 10.8 meters of 4.4 grams was found directly under the surface mineralization. And in their case, their discovery hole, 16 meters of 7 grams, was discovered directly under their surface mineralization, which was 15 meters of 10 grams. So you have a very analogous discovery hole. And it's to note that their holes on either side, CW6 over here and CW4, kind of came up dusters. But it's really this whole CW5 that was credited with the start of the discovery at Hope Brook. We have something that I think is very analogous, very similar looking result. And, you know, what does it mean for the future? That's what we need to discover. But certainly in the case of Hope Brook, 2 years later in 1985, this is what the plan map of drilling looked like. You had approximately 150 drill holes put into it. You can see that the bulk of the deposit was evolving right under the surface channels. And by that point in 1985, BP Selco had an internal resource estimate of 11.5 million tons at 4.7 grams. That was somewhere around 1.7 million ounces. I have an adequate disclaimer down here, which you should all read because this was pre-CIM resource categories. But at any rate, it seems to have reconciled fairly well with what's been done since then, which is this. Here's the Hope Brook open pit. This is an image from 2013 taken from a technical report. Between 1987 and 1997, 750,000 ounces were produced. As of 2021, in Big Ridge Gold's most recent resource estimate, they have 110,000 ounces of contained gold as an inferred resource and 844,000 ounces of gold as an indicated resource, which is showing pretty much that BP Selco's initial estimate of around 1.7 million ounces gold total was probably bang on the money. But that's to show the scale of things. This is the footprint of that open pit at Hope Brook. Again, this is shown to scale, so you can see that we've put in a very few number of drill holes across Hickey's Pond, and we have lots of potential going forward, I think, to discover this kind of body at Hope Brook, or at Hickey's Pond, I'm sorry. Let's zoom out. We've been talking about Hickey's Pond, which is right here in the northeast of the property. We've talked about that 7-kilometer trend which runs along here and which is unexplored with any drilling. The overall property, of course, runs from here to about here. This is a 30-kilometer trend. We have an additional zone at Tower, which has some geophysics and has a very interesting VTEM anomaly at Tower. Tower is exposed on surface with a large boudins of epithermal quartz, has flowed up to a gram, has never seen a drill hole, and is located right on a dirt road, extremely easy access. We also have a 6-kilometer trend here of historical gold showings, ranging from Strange here in the southwest, which has historical rock chips up to 1.5 grams, and up to Ridge, which has rock chips up to 0.5 gram, which is a newly discovered showing. None of these have a significant amount of outcrop, other than perhaps Bullwinkle, which are large zones of epithermal quartz. And none of these have ever seen a drill hole either. So overall, you're looking at approximately 20 kilometers of strike of known alteration. You have a lot of extra room in this property to explore the strike extension of these systems. And very little here has ever been drilled. The only historical drilling and our drilling right here at Hickey's Pond in the northeast. So we think that this is a property that has all the hallmarks of a classic high sulphidation epithermal district. We have the right types of alteration over a large land package. It has not been drill tested, and we are now in a very good position to do exactly that. So in brief, here's what we've done since 2018. You can see we started staked in Q2 2018, proceeded with some biogeochem, prospecting geology. We did our various IP resistivity and airborne surveys, had a drill campaign in 2 segments in 2020, and then worked on our IPO and getting the funding necessary through 2021 to be where we are today. We currently have our airborne contractor on the property at the moment, completing the geophysics over the rest of the property package. And we expect to be drilling in early 2022. We expect to be mobilizing in mid-January after the holidays. And we expect to be putting together a good drill program, a minimum 10,000 meter program at Hickey's Pond, a minimum 2,500 meters elsewhere, and we'll continue on with our regional exploration. So that's in summary. We have a large land package. All of our drilling in 2020 returned very encouraging results for a high sulphidation epithermal system. We've only tested a small proportion of even our initial IP anomaly. We've completed an IPO successfully in November 2021, raising 6.9 million gross, 6.47 million net. We have a strong management team, and we have a very supportive and involved board with decades of exploration experience and success in Newfoundland and globally. We expect diamond drilling to start in Q1 2022, and we're hoping you'll follow our story. So that's all I have for you today. I appreciate the attention. My contact info is up here. I'm very happy to talk to existing or prospective shareholders, so please feel free to reach out at any time, and I'll pass it back to Mark.
Thank you very much for that wonderful share, David. And we can't move forward without a huge congratulations, as you mentioned, November IPO, a big chapter change for the company. I know that there are many eyes watching, but a moment to celebrate growth and potential. So a big congratulations to the team for that.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was it was a long process, but we made it across the line and raised a good amount of money, I think, to give us the strong treasury for the work that comes next.
I would think. Well, thank you for the inside view. It was a great, well-rounded tour of where the company is and what the trajectory looks like. At this point, as you mentioned, we're going to turn it over to questions from the audience from various parts of the world. So with that in mind, looking forward to 2022 and celebrating the success of the IPO, what are the target priorities for 2022, Dave?
Well, this is the type of deposit that we think that we can move on fairly quickly. I mean, when you look at near surface, high sulfidation, bulk tonnage targets, they're either going to be there or not, they're not going to be there. And that's something that can be tested relatively easily. So we're going to have two focuses primarily on our Hickey's Pond project. One is going to be proceeding to a resource delineation project, like drill project. So we're going to be drilling on appropriate centers, drill centers, to produce or to integrate those results into a mineral resource. That's the number one, because we think there is the potential there for that bulk tonnage target that we can start to define pretty quickly. And it should become very apparent as we proceed if we have the potential for this. And if we do, that should attract a lot of attention. The second thing is that these deposits will have zones of higher grade. We saw with our surface channel sampling, for example, that we discovered that 7-meter intercept of copper gold breccia. That's both high grade gold and high grade copper. And that is something that you see in the feeder structures of high sulfidation environments. That had never been noted before at anywhere on the Burin that I'm aware of. So the fact that we saw this at surface gives you that indication that we may be near a feeder structure. And so as part of that drilling, we'll be paying attention, looking for those zones of higher grade, because the higher grade will help give us the promotional attention. Of course, everybody is attracted to grade. Yes. It's an important thing to have. So we'll be looking to try to generate results that have a good chance of hitting this breccia if it's present in the subsurface. That'll be the main focus of the early drilling at Hickey's Pond. We also have, I think, as soon as we can ramp up to a second drill, we're going to have all of those outboard targets, which are undrilled, just need basic scout drilling. And, it's all upside for those targets because they've never seen any historical drilling at all. So I think that the initial focus will be on Hickey's Pond, and we'll be looking to add that second drill to attend to the other parts of the property as quickly as we can to start building a pipeline.
Terrific. David, thank you. That gives us something to focus and keep an eye on. Appreciate that very much. Next question comes in. Will you follow up on the high-grade mineralized drill hit from the scout drilling? Yeah,
well, that sort of ties into what I was just saying. That zone that we see, which is very near surface, will need to be followed up and stepped out from at tighter centers, because of course these zones, these volumes of the higher grade portion of the mineralized rock will need to be chased out more carefully. And so certainly one of the first drill holes we'll be returning to the actual showing and trying to trace out what does the volume of this higher grade portion look like. So absolutely.
Thank you for that. Moving on, could the deposit here extend over multiple kilometers at depth?
Well, in the modern environment, high sulfidation, or all epithermal deposits they're called epithermal because they form near the surface. So typically the productive depths of a modern system will be a few hundred meters. That is the range at which gold is coming out of the solution and depositing itself. Now, in the case of a system like ours, this system has been tilted on its side, and it's kind of caught up in a shear zone. So what you're seeing as you go down the shear plane in the modern world, as you go down, if you were to mine this, is we may not be going down in depth in the system. We may be going laterally. So there's really not a lot of information available yet to say how deep this goes. But certainly some of the equivalents that we see in this type of terrain around the world, some of these things can go for 500 or 600 meters, certainly. Where this goes, we don't know. But
fair enough.
Something to find out.
What an exciting time, given you're just out of the gate at this point, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's early days.
Very good. Question appropriately. So how deep are you drilling in the upcoming program?
Yeah. So as I said before, the focus on Hickey's Pond is really going to be to try to move to a resource as quickly as possible. In that context, looking at that sort of bulk tonnage potential, open pit potential, we don't really need to be going further than about 200 meters vertical, because that's sort of the limit of what a modern open pit system might look like for this type of geometry. So we'd be looking at trying to hit drill holes down to about 200 meters vertical, which will work out to something like 300-meter long drill holes at their maximum length. So not particularly deep, but of course there's that potential for the high grade. If you start to find feeder structures that have high grades, you could chase those as much deeper, because they would have those potential to be underground projects eventually.
Very good. We'll know when we know. I appreciate that very much. Another question that's come out a couple times here: is the project accessed year-round, David?
Yeah, it's like I showed on the infrastructure slide. We have the Burin Highway, just located a few kilometers west of the project. We have a good access trail into the project, and we're currently working on getting a full pickup truck drivable road permitted. So we expect that should be permitted by the spring. But for the moment, you can access the project year round. You change from ATVs to skidoos about this time of year usually. And then some things are actually easier to do in the winter. Drilling activities are generally easier to do once the ground is frozen. Access is easier. You don't have to be afraid of moving the drill around. So certain activities are easier to do in the winter, certain are easier to do in the summer, but you can really access this property year round. Absolutely.
Very good. Well, that leads to another question I've had in my mind, which is, what's it like to be working in the jurisdiction in Newfoundland? Some of our viewers and investors may not be as familiar with that jurisdiction. I'm just curious your thoughts there.
Yeah, well, it reminds me, the part of Newfoundland is a big island, first of all. So the actual physiography of the island varies widely from place to place. It's a beautiful island. The northern part of the Burin Peninsula actually reminds me of the subarctic. There's actually very little in terms of trees. There's just little scrubby black spruce, a lot of bogs, a lot of shallow bogs, and it's all volcanic. It's all, sorry, not volcanic. It's glacial terrain. So there's a lot of glacial till everywhere, just a thin veneer of glacial till. So it's kind of a moonscape. It's very pretty. It's a gorgeous part of Newfoundland. Anybody who's there should definitely drive down to Fortune and see what it looks like. But yeah, it reminds me of the subarctic with less bugs. So it's actually a really nice part of Newfoundland. Now, that would not apply to parts of central Newfoundland where you get a lot more bugs, and it would look more like the Canadian Shield, for example.
Fair enough.
But it's a very striking place.
I appreciate that very much. An overview question here, David. What is the overall strategy of the company? Realizing you're in early days and you've just launched a very successful IPO, but where do you see the company, for example, in say 3 to 5 years?
I think that, both myself, Phil Walford, Sherry Dunsworth, we share a very similar perspective on this. If people have followed Phil Walford in the past, he's a serious company building geologist. Like that's what he's focused on. He's focused on looking for a resource that's going to have the potential to be mineable. And so that's what we're looking to replicate here, is that success that Phil and Sherry got at Valentine Lake. It's going to be methodical work. It's going to be work that's designed to start to build a resource as quickly as possible. And I think it's one of the things that we think we have a reasonable shot at is demarking ourselves from our peers in Newfoundland by producing a resource quickly. And I think that's something that our type of deposit is particularly amenable to. It takes a lot more drilling in the orogenic systems because you have to drill much, much tighter because these are narrow vein systems. Whereas in the bulk tonnage targets, with wider spaced holes, you can quickly build a resource. And I think that is one of the advantages that we have in our type of deposit. So within that 2 to 3 year, I would be within that 24-month period would be where I would be looking to do the bulk of the drilling necessary to publish a maiden resource over Hickey's Pond.
Okay.
And by then we'll also have tested a number of the other systems. There are also other systems across the Burin that I have my eye on that I'd like to add to the property package for pipeline targets. But really on the main prospect, that 2 to 3 year time frame would be the time frame I'd be looking to put together a resource and really test, see what do we have, can we publish a resource. I think that's the best way we can return value to the investors is demonstrate clearly that this is a serious mining play and that it has potential to be a takeout target before long.
Very good. And I can appreciate absolutely, given the recent success of your IPO and just emerging on the Toronto Exchange. A question from David comes in. Any forecast about a U.S. listing, David?
Yeah, that is on the list of things that we're looking at to do in the new years. We've gotten all the information from our partners there. It's clearly going to take a couple of months to work through the process. There's a lot of checks and balances and paperwork to do, but an OTC listing will be accomplished, I would guess, by the second quarter of 2022. So we will be trading on the OTC before long.
Terrific. Thanks for that perspective. I will say this is one of the more exciting companies to watch from our perspective, given the newness and the energy that's rising, David. And I can't tell you the gratitude we have for people like yourself showing up to give an inside view of the company, the vision, where things are moving towards. I do like to open it at the end, as always, to say, is there something we haven't touched on or something else that's come to mind to share with our audience?
I think we had a pretty well-rounded, there's a number of things I had to gloss over. We did a lot of early work that's not in this presentation, but we did some pretty innovative work with biogeochemistry, for example, that I thought had some really interesting results, and that we used definitively in our targeting, and that I think there will be some interesting drill targets to come out of. So there's definitely some, a lot more things that we did that we didn't have time to talk about, but really, I think we got a pretty good overview of where the company is at. I think it's a good opportunity for anyone who's looking for a serious mining play in Newfoundland that has exactly what you mentioned, that 2 to 3 year time span, time for us to go and do some serious work, time to us, for us to get in there, get 2 drills going, get a serious program of drilling going, and then let's see what we discover. But it's for anybody who's interested in that kind of project. I think this is a good opportunity. It's a great time in the markets right now for anyone looking to buy, for obvious reasons. Everybody's had a tough beginning of December, but we're in a good position. We have a good treasury. We have a good plan for what we're going to do next, and we have the time to do it, which is the most important part.
I appreciate that very much. Well, I know for a fact we'll be talking again, David. These are early days, as you've said, but an exciting time for the company. I think the questions were very reflective of the curiosity and the interest in the company from our audience as well, which is why we're here at the VID conferences, to bring investors and companies together. You've done a fine job, and really appreciate the care and attention to your presentation. So I'll say thank you for your time, and we'll look forward to watching the company.
Thanks very much, Mark. It was a pleasure to be here, and thanks to everybody who listened in.
All the best for the holidays. And at this point, I'll remind our audience that as we move on from this presentation, you'll be moved over to the survey. Please provide any feedback that you can so we can do a better job next time around. And at the top of the hour, we welcome our last guest of the day, Fury Gold Mines, at the top of this coming hour. So thanks for the time, David. Wishing you all the best, and we'll talk soon.
Yes, all the best.
Thank you.